The moment Caleb Drayton's lips curled into that cruel smile, Elena Cross knew her life was ending. Not metaphorically, not dramatically, actually ending. The person she'd been, the future she'd imagined, the careful illusions she'd built around herself like armor. 300 people packed into St. Catherine's Church, their faces turned toward the altar like flowers seeking sun, and every single one of them was about to watch her destruction. She didn't know it yet, but in 7 minutes, she would make a choice that would change everything. In 7 minutes, Elena Cross would die, and something else would be born. Before we begin this journey together, I want to invite you to follow Elena's story all the way to the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's dive in. The wedding dress weighed 14 pounds. Elena had learned this fact 3 weeks ago during the final fitting, when Mrs. Holloway's assistant had mentioned it casually while adjusting the bustle. 14 pounds of silk, lace, crystal beading, and hand-sewn pearls. 14 pounds of her father's desperate hopes. 14 pounds of compromise and duty, and the word fine spoken so many times it had lost all meaning. Now standing at the altar with those 14 pounds pressing down on her shoulders like a physical manifestation of expectation, Elena wondered if the dress would be heavy enough to drag her body to the bottom of Miller's Lake if she walked straight into the water after this was over. Not that she was planning to, but the thought had a strange comfort to it. "You look pale," Caleb whispered, his smile bright and public-facing. His hand gripped her elbow, too tight, as always, in that specific way that left no bruises but made its point. "Smile, darling. Everyone's watching." Everyone was always watching. That was the problem with Millbrook Hollow, population 2,847, where 300 of those souls had crammed themselves into St. Catherine's Church on this frigid December afternoon. Where every face turned toward the altar was a judgment, a calculation, a bet on whether Lawrence Cross's daughter could actually pull this off. Elena smiled. She'd practiced this smile in mirrors since she was 16, soft but not weak, pleasant but not vapid, the kind of smile that said, "I belong here," without actually claiming anything that might be taken away. Father Morrison cleared his throat, his ancient voice carrying through the church with surprising strength. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." "Actually," Caleb interrupted, his voice cutting through the sacred formula like a knife through silk, "I think we need to address something first." The silence that followed had texture. Elena could feel it pressing against her skin, could hear the collective intake of breath from 300 people simultaneously leaning forward. Father Morrison blinked, confusion creasing his weathered face. "Son, this isn't the time for—" "No, I think it is." Caleb released Elena's elbow and turned to face the congregation, his shoulders squared, his jaw set in that way he probably thought made him look decisive. Powerful. "I think it's exactly the time, because I've been lying. We've all been lying, and I'm done with it." Elena's heartbeat had become something separate from her body. A drum in a distant room, growing louder, faster, completely disconnected from the frozen thing she'd become. "Caleb," she managed, her voice smaller than she'd intended. "What are you doing?" He didn't look at her. He was playing to the crowd now, and Elena was just a prop in whatever performance he'd scripted. "I'm doing what I should have done 3 months ago when your father came crawling to mine, begging for this marriage like it was some kind of business merger. Which, let's be honest, is exactly what it is." Someone gasped. Elena thought it might have been Mrs. Henderson from the Ladies' Auxiliary, but she couldn't be sure. The world had developed a strange quality, too bright, too sharp, like she was seeing it through glass that might shatter at any moment. "Caleb, please!" Her father's voice, desperate and broken, rising from the front pew. "No, Lawrence! No more pleas, no more negotiations." Caleb finally turned to look at Elena, and the contempt in his eyes was so pure it almost had beauty to it. "Look at her. Really look at her. Is this what I'm supposed to wake up next to for the rest of my life? This plain, desperate thing?" The church had gone beyond silent. This was the silence of witnesses. The silence of people who would talk about this moment for years, who would dissect it over coffee and Sunday dinners, who would use it as a cautionary tale for their daughters about pride and ambition and reaching above your station. Elena felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart. That was too romantic, too clean. This was deeper. This was the sound of the foundation breaking. You want to know the truth? Caleb's voice rose, gaining confidence from the audience's rapt attention. Your father owes mine $73,000. $73,000 that he gambled away, drank away, pissed away on schemes that anyone with half a brain could see were doomed from the start. And his solution? Sell his daughter like livestock. That's not... Lawrence Cross tried to stand, but Caleb's father, Edmund Drayton, placed a hand on his shoulder and pushed him back down. The gesture was gentle but absolute. A king settling a peasant. And I almost went through with it, Caleb continued, warming to his subject now. I actually considered it. Take the plain girl, forgive the debt, let the crosses attach themselves to the Drayton name like barnacles on a ship. But then I thought, why should I? Why should I sacrifice my future, my happiness, my entire life for someone else's failure? He stepped closer to Elena, and she could smell his cologne, expensive, overwhelming, chosen to announce his presence before he entered a room. You're not beautiful enough to overcome your father's shame. You're not charming enough to make people forget where you came from. You're not clever enough to hide how desperately you need this. His hand rose, and for a moment Elena thought he might strike her, but instead he gestured to her dress, her carefully styled hair, her grandmother's pearls. You're just adequate. And adequate isn't enough. Not for me. Not for the Drayton name. The crack in Elena's chest widened, spread, became a chasm. She waited for tears, for rage, for something that felt like the emotion this moment should contain. But there was nothing. Just a strange, cold clarity. I worked with the church council last week, Caleb announced, turning back to the congregation. This wedding was never filed with the county. Legally, this ceremony has no standing, so I'm not leaving a bride at the altar. There was never going to be a bride. Just a girl in an expensive dress, believing in fairy tales. He paused, letting the weight of that land. Then he looked directly at Elena's father. The debt still stands, Lawrence, with interest. You have 90 days. Someone in the back of the church started crying. Several people were whispering now, the sound building like wind before a storm. Elena saw faces she'd known her entire life. Mrs. Chen, who'd taught her piano, old Mr. Vasquez, who'd let her pick apples from his orchard, Rebecca Marsh, who she'd sat next to in Sunday school for 10 years, and every single one of them was looking at her with some combination of pity, disgust, and satisfaction. The satisfaction was the worst part. The way some people's eyes lit up when someone else's world collapsed. The way suffering became entertainment if it happened to someone else. Elena. Father Morrison's hand touched her shoulder, gentle and useless. Child, I'm so sorry. If there's anything... But Elena wasn't listening anymore. She was doing calculations. 90 days, $73,000 plus interest. Her father's construction business that had been failing for 3 years. Their house that was already mortgaged twice over. Her mother's medical bills from the cancer that had taken her 5 years ago. Bills they were still paying off in installments that never seemed to shrink the total. The math didn't work. It had never worked. This wedding had been the only solution to an impossible equation. And now it was gone. Say something, Caleb demanded, his voice sharp with irritation. He'd expected something from her, tears, begging, rage, some kind of performance to match his own. Her silence was ruining his moment. Elena looked at him. Really looked. Perhaps for the first time since they'd started this charade 6 months ago. She saw a man who'd been raised to believe his cruelty was strength, his wealth was worth, his name was identity. She saw someone who would never know what it meant to be desperate, to be powerless, to be so thoroughly erased that even your pain became someone else's entertainment. She saw someone she was grateful she would never have to touch again. Elena, her father's voice, desperate now. Elena, please, we can fix this. We can talk to them. We can... She turned and walked, not ran. Walking required more control, more intention. She walked down the altar steps in her 14-pound dress, her grandmother's pearls cold against her collarbone, her veil trailing behind her like a ghost. The crowd parted. Of course they did. Nobody wanted to be associated with this kind of failure. It might be contagious. Where do you think you're going? Caleb called after her, but his voice had lost its certainty. This wasn't in his script. She was supposed to collapse, to beg, to make herself even smaller than he'd already made her. Elena didn't answer. She pushed through the heavy oak doors of St. Catherine's, and the December cold hit her like a baptism. The afternoon sun was already dying, bleeding out across a sky that promised snow. The church sat on the edge of Millbrook Hollow, where the tamed streets gave way to wild country, farmland transitioning to forest, forest climbing toward the mountains that loomed over the valley like sleeping giants. Behind her, the church doors opened again. Voices spilled out, her father Caleb, others. She didn't turn to look. She just kept walking, her ridiculous shoes crunching on the gravel parking lot, then on the frost-hardened grass beyond. "Elena Cross, you get back here right now!" Her father's voice, the same tone he'd used when she was 12 and had talked back at dinner, as if authority and volume could still compel obedience. But Elena had spent 24 years being obedient. 24 years being pleasant, appropriate, grateful for whatever scraps of dignity people decided to give her. 24 years making herself smaller so other people could feel bigger. She was done being small. The grass gave way to the old service road that ran along the valley's edge. In summer, this road was passable, leading to the ranger stations and hiking trails that marked the boundary between civilization and wilderness. In winter, it was abandoned. The Forest Service didn't have the budget to maintain it once the snow came. Elena's shoes were falling apart. The delicate heels, designed for carpeted church aisles and hotel ballroom receptions, were never meant for gravel and frozen earth. She felt one snap, then the other, but she didn't stop. She kicked them off and kept walking in stockinged feet, the cold immediate and absolute. "Elena!" Multiple voices now. A small crowd had followed her out of the church, driven by concern or curiosity or the simple human instinct to watch a disaster in progress. "You can't go out there! There's a storm coming!" She knew about the storm. Everyone knew. It had been on the weather reports all week, a major system moving down from Canada, the kind that could dump 3 feet of snow and trap the valley for days. People had stocked up on groceries, checked their generators, prepared to wait it out in the safety of their homes. Elena had no home to return to. Even if the house still technically belonged to her father for another 90 days, it had stopped being home long before today. Maybe it had never been home. Maybe home was just another word for a place where you learn to make yourself acceptable to other people. The service road curved up toward the tree line, and Elena followed it. Her feet were numb now, which was a mercy. The wedding dress caught on bushes, tore on rocks, collected mud and ice along its hem. The crystal beading that had cost extra was probably falling off, leaving a trail behind her like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. But this wasn't a fairy tale. In fairy tales, the prince rescued you. In fairy tales, being good and patient and sweet was rewarded. In fairy tales, suffering meant something. This was just reality. And in reality, sometimes you were left at the altar, in front of everyone you'd ever known, your humiliation served up as entertainment, your father's failures carved into your identity like a brand. In reality, there was no rescue coming. There was just you, and the choices you made, and the consequences that followed. The first snowflakes began to fall as Elena reached the trees, big, fat flakes that meant the storm was starting in earnest. Behind her, the voices had faded. Either they'd given up or their concern had run up against the more pressing concern of getting home before the roads became impassable. She pushed deeper into the forest. The trees were mostly evergreens this far up, pine and spruce that held their color even in winter, their branches heavy with old snow. The temperature was dropping fast now, the way it did in the mountains when the sun gave up. Elena's breath came out in white clouds, and her dress, which had been too warm in the church, was worse than useless out here. She should turn back. Some rational part of her brain was screaming this obvious truth. She was underdressed, unprepared, already hypothermic if the tingling in her extremities was any indication. She had no food, no water, no shelter, no plan beyond putting distance between herself and the church. But turning back meant facing them. Meant walking back into that building and seeing the pity and satisfaction in their eyes. Meant listening to her father beg and scheme and try to salvage something from this disaster. Meant existing in a world where her worth was measured in debts and marriages and the approval of people who'd watched her destruction with hungry eyes. She couldn't do it. Whatever was waiting for her in this forest, cold, death, oblivion, it felt cleaner than going back. The service road disappeared under fresh snow, but there was a trail, barely visible, marked by blazes on the trees that the Forest Service maintained for summer hikers. Elena followed it without really deciding to, her body making choices her mind had abandoned. Up, away, deeper. The wind picked up, turning the gentle snowfall into something with teeth. It cut through the wedding dress like the fabric was made of paper, found every gap and opening, turned her skin to ice. Elena's vision was blurring now, whether from tears or snow or the beginning of the end, she couldn't tell. She thought about her mother, who'd died in a hospital room with machines beeping, and Lawrence Cross holding her hand, promising her that he'd take care of their daughter, that everything would be okay. She thought about how many promises her father had broken since then, how the drinking had gotten worse, the debts had piled up, the schemes had grown more desperate. She thought about Caleb's face when he'd called her adequate, not even worth the effort of cruelty, just dismissed, erased, rendered irrelevant with casual precision. She thought about Mrs. Henderson and Rebecca Marsh and all the others who'd watched her humiliation with bright, eager eyes, and she thought, good, let them talk, let them whisper, let them make up stories about what happened to Lawrence Cross's daughter. I'd rather be a ghost story than a cautionary tale. The trail was gone now, buried under accumulating snow. The trees were thicker here, their branches forming a canopy that blocked what little light remained. Elena's feet were beyond numb. She couldn't feel them at all anymore, which meant she kept stumbling, falling, dragging herself up and pushing forward because stopping felt like giving up. And giving up felt like letting them win. She didn't know who they were anymore. Caleb, her father, the whole town, the universe itself, which seemed designed to punish people for having the audacity to hope for something better? It didn't matter. She just kept moving. Until she couldn't. Elena's legs gave out somewhere around what she thought might be nightfall, though it was hard to tell through the storm. She collapsed in the snow, the wedding dress billowing around her like a deflated parachute. She tried to stand, but her body had stopped obeying commands. The cold had moved past pain into something almost warm, almost comfortable. She'd read about this. Hypothermia's final stage, where your body starts to feel hot, where people strip off their clothes and crawl into small spaces because their brain has stopped processing reality correctly. She was dying, and her traitorous nervous system was trying to convince her that everything was fine. Okay, Elena whispered to no one, to the storm, to whatever was listening. Okay. She closed her eyes, which is why she didn't see the light at first, didn't notice the beam cutting through the snow and darkness, sweeping back and forth across the trees. Didn't hear the footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crunching through the drifts. What she felt was hands, strong hands gripping her shoulders, rolling her over, and a voice, rough, annoyed, very much alive, cutting through the storm. You've got to be kidding me. Elena forced her eyes open. There was a face above her, barely visible through the snow. Male, bearded, wearing a hat pulled low and a jacket that looked like it had survived several wars. The beam of a flashlight pointed at her face, and she saw his expression shift from annoyance to something more complicated. A wedding dress, the voice said flatly. You're out here in a goddamn wedding dress. Elena tried to speak, but her jaw wouldn't cooperate. The cold had locked her muscles, turned her tongue to wood. Never mind. Don't talk. Save your energy. The hands moved with surprising efficiency, checking her pulse, her breathing, the color of her extremities. You're hypothermic. Stage 2, maybe early stage 3. If I leave you here, you'll be dead in an hour. Good, Elena thought, but couldn't say, which I'm not going to do, despite my better judgment. The man stood, and Elena saw he was tall, very tall, with the kind of build that came from actual labor rather than gym memberships. He bent and picked her up like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. This is going to hurt. Your body's going to fight the warming process, but if you want to live, you're going to have to endure it. Elena wanted to tell him she hadn't decided yet whether she wanted to live, that the question felt more complicated than he was making it sound. But she couldn't form words, couldn't do anything except let herself be carried through the storm, the wedding dress dragging through the snow behind them like a flag of surrender. The man moved through the forest with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. No hesitation, no checking landmarks, just steady progress through terrain that had defeated Elena completely. She felt the rhythm of his breathing, the controlled power of his movements, and realized she was in the hands of someone who belonged out here. Someone for whom the wilderness wasn't an emergency, but home. They walked for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. Then there was a structure, dark wood that blended into the trees, barely visible even with the flashlight. A cabin, small and solid, with smoke rising from a chimney that meant warmth, shelter, survival. The man kicked the door open and carried Elena inside. The temperature difference was immediate and shocking. Her body, which had been shutting down in the cold, suddenly woke up to how much danger it was in. She started shaking, violent, uncontrollable tremors that rattled her teeth. "There it is," the man said, laying her on a bed near a wood stove that radiated heat. "That's the rewarming response. It's going to feel like you're dying, but you're actually doing the opposite." He moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire, filling a kettle with water, pulling blankets from somewhere. Elena watched through blurred vision, her body convulsing with shivers so intense they felt like seizures. "We need to get you out of that dress," he said, returning to the bed. "The fabric's wet and it's pulling heat away from your core. I'm going to cut it off. If you have any objections, now's the time to voice them." Elena didn't object. Couldn't object. The dress had stopped being clothing and become a weight, a prison, a symbol of everything she was trying to escape. The man produced a knife, serious and functional, the kind meant for field dressing game, and began cutting through 14 pounds of silk and lace and broken promises. The sound of ripping fabric should have meant something, but Elena was beyond caring. She watched pieces of the dress fall away like molted skin, like the shell of something that was finished being one thing and hadn't yet decided what to become next. Underneath, she was wearing the expensive lingerie Caleb's mother had insisted on. White lace, completely impractical, designed to be looked at rather than worn. The man's expression didn't change. He wrapped her in wool blankets, rough and warm, then lifted her again and positioned her closer to the stove. "Drink this." A cup appeared, filled with something that steamed. Small sips. Your stomach's going to want to reject it, but try to keep it down. The liquid was bitter, some kind of tea with herbs Elena didn't recognize. She managed a few sips before her stomach did exactly what he'd predicted, and she spent the next several minutes dry heaving into a bucket he'd somehow anticipated she'd need. When the spasms passed, she found herself being repositioned on the bed, more blankets added, a hot water bottle placed against her core. The man worked in silence, his movements economical and sure. This was clearly not his first time treating hypothermia. "How long was I out there?" Elena managed, her voice raw. "Found you about half a mile from here. Based on your condition, you'd been in the storm maybe 3 hours." He met her eyes, and his were gray. Not the soft gray of clouds, but the hard gray of stone. "You walked 3 hours into a blizzard in a wedding dress. Either you're the stupidest person I've ever met, or you were trying to die. Which is it?" Elena wanted to tell him she didn't know, that it had been both and neither, a decision and an abandonment of decision, an act of courage or cowardice, depending on how you looked at it. But the words tangled in her throat, and what came out was something else entirely. "He left me at the altar, in front of everyone. He said I was adequate." The man's expression didn't change. "And that was worth dying over?" "You don't understand." "No, I don't. Because I'm still alive, which means I've never decided that someone else's opinion of me was more important than my own survival." The words hit like a slap. Elena felt anger spark in her chest, weak, guttering, but there. "Easy for you to say. You live alone in the woods. You don't have to face people, face their judgment. I chose this." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "Nobody forced me to live here. Nobody forced you to walk into that storm. We both made choices. The difference is, I'm willing to live with the consequences of mine." He stood, moved to the small kitchen area, began preparing something that smelled like food. Elena lay in the pile of blankets, her body still shaking but warming, her mind trying to process what had just happened. She'd tried to die, or at least hadn't tried very hard to live, and this stranger had saved her for reasons she didn't understand. "Why did you come looking for me?" she asked. "I didn't. I was checking my trap lines before the storm got bad. Found your tracks, followed them to make sure some tourist hadn't gotten lost. By the time I realized you were actually trying to kill yourself, it seemed wasteful to let perfectly good meat freeze in the snow." Elena couldn't tell if he was joking. His voice held no inflection, no hint of humor or cruelty, just statement of fact. "I'm not meat," she said quietly. "Out here, everything's meat. You, me, the deer in the forest. We're all just protein waiting to break down and feed something else. The only question is whether you break down on your schedule or nature's. He brought her a bowl of something, stew maybe, with chunks of meat and vegetables that looked nothing like what came from a grocery store. Elena took it with shaking hands, and he steadied the bowl until she could manage on her own. Eat. Your body needs calories to rewarm properly. The stew was good, better than good, rich and complex, seasoned with things that tasted wild, foraged. Elena ate slowly, and as the warmth spread through her body, she began to notice her surroundings properly for the first time. The cabin was small but well organized. One main room serving as kitchen, living space, and bedroom. Shelves lined with books, jars of preserved food, tools maintained with obvious care. A rifle mounted above the door, snowshoes hanging on the wall. Everything had a place, a purpose. Nothing decorative, nothing wasted. This was what it looked like when someone built a life deliberately, without negotiation or compromise. "What's your name?" Elena asked. The man was cleaning dishes in a basin, his back to her. He took his time answering, as if deciding whether the question deserved a response. "Kyle Rourke." "I'm Elena. I don't need to know." He turned, his gray eyes meeting hers with uncomfortable directness. "You can stay tonight. The storm won't break until morning, and you'd die if I sent you out now. But when it clears, you go back to wherever you came from. I don't do rescue missions, and I definitely don't do charity cases." "I can't go back." "Then you'll go somewhere else. Not my problem." He moved to a chair near the stove, settled into it with the ease of someone who'd occupied that exact spot 1,000 times. "But you don't stay here. I've built a life that works because I don't let complications into it. And people, especially people who run into blizzards in wedding dresses, are nothing but complications." Elena should have felt insulted. Instead, she felt something like relief. No pity, no false comfort, no promises that everything would be okay, just brutal honesty delivered without malice. "The town will look for me," she said, testing. "Maybe. Until the storm makes it too dangerous, then they'll wait it out and assume you died. In 3 days, they'll stop looking. In 3 weeks, they'll stop talking about it. In 3 months, you'll be a story they tell to scare young girls about the dangers of pride and poor decisions." He was right. Elena knew he was right. Millbrook Hollow had short attention spans for tragedies that didn't directly affect them. She would become a cautionary tale, then a footnote, then forgotten. "Good," she said quietly. Kyle raised an eyebrow. "Good?" "Let them forget me. Let them tell their stories. I don't care. You will care when you're hungry, when you're cold, when the reality of being alone sets in." "I've been alone my entire life," Elena said, and was surprised by the truth of it. "I've just been surrounded by people while it happened." Kale studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood, moved to a closet, pulled out blankets and a pillow. "You can sleep there." He pointed to the bed she was already on. "I'll take the floor. Don't mistake that for kindness. You're still weak and the bed's better for your recovery. In the morning, we reassess." He made himself a pallet near the stove, settled onto it with the efficiency of someone who'd slept in worse places. Within minutes, his breathing had evened out, deep and regular. Elena lay in the borrowed bed, wrapped in wool blankets that smelled like wood smoke and pine, and listened to the storm howl outside. The wind screamed around the cabin's corners, rattled the shutters, reminded her how close she'd come to becoming just another body the spring thaw would reveal. But she wasn't dead. Against all odds, against her own half-formed intentions, she was alive. The wedding dress lay in pieces on the floor, destroyed beyond any possibility of repair. 14 pounds of silk and lace and crystal beading reduced to rags. Elena looked at it and felt nothing. Not grief, not relief, just a distant acknowledgement that the thing she'd been was over, and what came next was unwritten. She closed her eyes and listened to Kael's breathing, steady and sure. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, for the first time in as long as she could remember, Elena felt something like peace. Not happiness, that felt too large, too complicated. Just the simple peace of having made a choice and survived it. The mountain had tested her, and she'd failed. But failure, it turned out, was just another way of saying not finished yet. Dawn came without announcement, just a gradual lessening of darkness visible through the cabin's single window. Elena woke to the sound of wood being split. rhythmic, precise strikes that cut through the morning silence like a metronome. Her body ached in ways she hadn't known were possible. Every muscle felt bruised, her feet throbbed with a deep, burning pain, and her throat was raw from breathing frozen air. But she was alive. She sat up slowly, the wool blankets falling away, and immediately regretted it. The cabin was cold. Not the killing cold of the storm, but cold enough that her breath misted. The fire in the stove had died to embers. Through the window, she could see Kyle in the clearing outside, axe rising and falling with mechanical efficiency, splitting logs that would become the heat that kept this place habitable. He'd been right about one thing. The storm had passed. The sky was that particular shade of winter blue that promised brutal cold and absolute clarity. Snow covered everything, fresh and unmarked except for Kyle's tracks leading from the cabin to the woodpile. Elena stood, testing her legs. They held, barely. Someone had left clothes on the chair near the bed. Rough wool pants, a thick flannel shirt, wool socks that looked hand-knitted. They were far too large, clearly Kyle's, but they were warm and they weren't a destroyed wedding dress, which made them perfect. She dressed slowly, her fingers clumsy with lingering cold damage. When she finally managed to get everything on, rolling up sleeves and cuffs, she caught her reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin. The woman looking back was a stranger. Her carefully styled hair had come loose, hung in tangled waves around a face that looked hollowed out, older. There were dark circles under her eyes, a bruise forming on her cheekbone where she must have fallen during her flight through the forest. But it was the expression that was most unfamiliar, not the careful pleasantness she'd cultivated for 24 years, but something raw and uncertain and real. The door opened, bringing a gust of cold air, and Kyle carrying an armload of split wood. He saw her standing there and stopped, his expression unreadable. "You're up." "I'm up," Elena confirmed. He dumped the wood into the bin near the stove, began building up the fire with the same efficient movements he brought to everything. "Storm's cleared. Road will be impassable for a few days until the county plows through, but you can make it back to town on foot if you leave soon. I'll give you proper boots and a coat. Consider it payment for the entertainment." Elena sat down at the small table, her legs suddenly unreliable again. "And if I don't want to go back?" Kale didn't look up from the fire. "Then you go somewhere else. Like I said, not my problem. I have nowhere else to go. Everyone has somewhere." He closed the stove door, stood, and finally met her eyes. "Family, friends, someone who'll take you in until you figure things out. My mother's dead. My father's the reason I was in that church. And my friends—" Elena laughed, a sound without humor. "I don't think I ever had friends, just people who were pleasant to me when it cost them nothing." Kale poured water from a kettle into 2 tin cups, added what looked like instant coffee, and set one in front of her. "Drink. You need to stay hydrated while your body finishes recovering." Elena wrapped her hands around the cup, let the warmth seep into her fingers. "How long have you been out here?" 7 years. "Alone?" "That's the point." He sat across from her, his own cup held loosely. "I don't do well with people. Never have. Civilization requires too much pretending, too many rules that don't serve any actual purpose. Out here things are simple. You work or you die. You adapt or you freeze. No politics, no social games, no one telling you who you're supposed to be. Sounds lonely." "Lonely assumes I want something I don't have." "I don't." He took a drink of coffee, his gray eyes studying her over the rim. "You, on the other hand, clearly want something. You just haven't figured out what it is yet." "I want to not go back to that town," Elena said quietly. "I want to never see those faces again, never hear their whispers, never have to smile and pretend that what happened was anything other than what it was." "Which was?" "Public execution, without the mercy of it being quick." Kale was silent for a moment, considering. "You think staying out here is the answer? Playing survivor in the woods until you get bored or scared or hungry enough to crawl back?" "I don't know what the answer is," Elena admitted. "I just know that going back feels like dying, slowly, in front of an audience. And staying here will be dying quickly, alone in the snow." He stood, moved to the shelves, began pulling down jars and packages. "You don't have skills for this life. You don't have knowledge, strength, or experience. You'd last maybe a week on your own before something killed you. Cold, hunger, injury, or just bad luck." He was right, and Elena knew it. But the certainty in his voice sparked something in her chest, that same weak anger that had flickered last night when he'd dismissed her pain. Then teach me. Cale turned, one eyebrow raised. Teach you. You survived out here for 7 years. You clearly know how. Teach me. Why would I do that? Elena stood, ignoring the way her legs trembled, and met his gaze as steadily as she could. Because you found me dying in the snow and you saved me. Which means some part of you, however small, still cares whether people live or die. And because she paused, searching for the truth in what she was about to say, because I think you're lonely, even if you won't admit it, and teaching me would give you a project, a purpose beyond just surviving another day. Cale's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Calculation, maybe. Consideration. You're making a lot of assumptions about someone you met 12 hours ago. Am I wrong? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Instead, he set a jar of what looked like preserved venison on the table, along with a package of dried fruit. Breakfast. Eat everything. You need to rebuild your strength. Elena ate while Kyle moved around the cabin, organizing supplies with the precision of someone conducting inventory. She watched him work, noting the way everything had its place, the way his movements were economical and sure. This wasn't just survival. It was a life built deliberately, every element chosen and maintained. If I agreed to teach you, Cale said finally, not looking at her, it wouldn't be pleasant. I don't coddle. I don't encourage. I show you once, and then you do it until you get it right, or you quit. I won't quit. Everyone says that. He turned, leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Everyone thinks they're tougher than they are, more committed than they are. Then the reality sets in. The cold, the hunger, the endless work just to maintain basic existence. And they break. I already broke, Elena said quietly. That's why I was in the snow. There's nothing left to break. Kyle studied her for a long moment. Then he pushed away from the counter, grabbed a heavy coat from a peg by the door, and tossed it to her. Put that on. If you can make it through today without crying, complaining, or asking to go back inside, I'll consider it. But the second you show weakness, the second you ask for mercy, the deal is off and you hike back to town. Elena stood, pulled on the coat. It was massive on her, the sleeves hanging past her hands, but it was warm and it was purpose. What are we doing? Checking trap lines. It's a 12-mile circuit through rough terrain. In this snow, it'll take most of the day. He pulled on his own coat, a battered thing that looked like it had survived decades. We leave in 5 minutes. Use the outhouse if you need to. There won't be bathroom breaks on the trail. The outhouse was a small wooden structure 50 yards from the cabin, and using it in negative-degree weather with a bruised body and borrowed clothes was possibly the least dignified experience of Elena's life. But she managed it, and when she returned to the cabin, Kyle was waiting with a pair of boots and snowshoes. Boots first, 2 pairs of socks. He watched as she struggled with the laces, her cold-damaged fingers clumsy. He didn't help. Snowshoes attached like this. He demonstrated on his own feet with quick, practiced movements. They distribute your weight across the snow surface. Without them, you'll sink to your thigh with every step and exhaust yourself in the first mile. Elena copied his movements, fumbling, but eventually getting the snowshoes secured. When she stood, the unfamiliar weight on her feet made her stumble, but she caught herself. Ready? Cale asked. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. They set out into a world transformed by snow. Everything familiar was buried, reshaped. The trail Kyle followed was invisible to Elena's eyes, but he moved with absolute confidence, navigating by trees and rocks and patterns she couldn't see. She struggled to keep up, the snowshoes awkward and heavy, her legs burning within the first 100 yards. Kale didn't slow down, didn't look back to check if she was managing, just maintained his steady pace, the distance between them growing with each step. Elena's pride lasted maybe half a mile. Then it was just survival, putting one foot in front of the other, breathing through the burn in her lungs, ignoring the pain in her feet and legs and everywhere else. The forest was silent except for the crunch of snow under their shoes and her own labored breathing. No birds, no animals, just white and green and the brutal blue sky overhead. After what felt like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, Kyle stopped at a tree marked with a blaze of orange paint. He knelt in the snow, began clearing away the fresh accumulation with gloved hands, and revealed a trap, metal jaws with teeth that looked vicious, even closed. "Leg hold trap," he said, his first word since they'd left the cabin. "Not legal in most places, but the rangers don't patrol this far out, and I reset them carefully so they don't maim." He examined the trap, then the surrounding snow. "Nothing here. Deer probably spooked from the storm." He reset the trap with quick, practiced movements, covered it again, and stood. 17 more to check. Try to keep up." They moved to the next location, then the next. Each trap was a small lesson in tracking and placement. How to read animal signs in the snow, how to position a trap along a game trail, how to distinguish between species by their tracks. Kyle didn't offer this information as teaching. He just spoke to himself as he worked, and Elena absorbed what she could through exhaustion and determination. At the fourth trap, there was something. Kyle saw it first, the disturbed snow, the dark shape half buried. He approached cautiously, and Elena followed, curious despite her fatigue. It was a rabbit, frozen solid in the trap's jaws. Kale knelt, examined it briefly, then released the mechanism and pulled the animal free. He held it up, showing Elena. "This is what meat looks like before it's packaged and priced. This is what death looks like when it serves a purpose." He pulled a knife from his belt, the same one he'd used to cut off her wedding dress, and with quick, efficient movements began field dressing the rabbit right there in the snow. Elena watched, expecting to feel sick, disturbed, something. But there was a strange beauty to it, the precision of the cuts, the way Kyle worked with respect rather than cruelty, the acknowledgement that this death meant his survival. "You need to be able to do this," Kyle said, not looking at her. "If you stay, if you learn, you need to understand that survival isn't clean. It's not moral. It's just necessary." "I understand," Elena said quietly. "No, you don't. Not yet." He finished with the rabbit, wrapped the dressed meat in cloth, and reset the trap. "But maybe you will." They continued the circuit. Elena's body moved beyond pain into a strange numbness where everything hurt equally, which meant nothing hurt specifically. Her mind disconnected from her physical suffering, started noticing other things, the way ice crystals caught sunlight, the pattern of animal tracks crossing and recrossing the snow, the absolute silence of the forest when they stood still. At the eighth trap, Kyle stopped and turned to her suddenly. "Give me your hands." Elena held them out, confused. Kyle pulled off his gloves, then hers, and examined her fingers carefully. Several were white at the tips, bloodless. "Frostbite starting," he said flatly. "You should have told me." "I didn't notice." "That's the problem. Out here not noticing gets you killed." He pulled her gloves back on, then his own. "We're heading back. You've proven enough for today. We haven't finished the circuit. I'll finish it tomorrow. You need to warm up before you lose fingers." He started back the way they'd come, his pace faster now, urgent. Elena followed, shame burning hotter than any frostbite. She'd failed his test, shown weakness, proven she wasn't cut out for this life. But when they reached the cabin and Kyle got her inside, built up the fire, and set her hands near the heat with instructions not to rub them, his voice wasn't angry, just matter of fact. "You made it 8 miles in terrain that should have destroyed you. That's not nothing." He moved to the kitchen, began preparing something. "But you need to learn to read your body better. Frostbite, hypothermia, dehydration, they don't announce themselves. You have to catch them early." "I'm sorry," Elena said. "Don't apologize. Learn." He brought her tea, the same bitter brew from last night. "Drink. Tell me what hurts." "Everything." "Be specific." Elena took inventory. "Feet, legs, lower back, shoulders. Fingers are burning now that they're warming up, and my lungs feel raw." Kale nodded. "Normal. All of it. Your body's adapting to demands it's never faced before. It'll get easier, but it'll take time." He sat across from her. "I'm going back out to finish the trap lines. You stay here, keep the fire going, and there's food in the jars on the second shelf. Don't go outside. Don't touch anything you don't understand, just rest." "When will you be back?" "Before dark." He stood, pulled his coat back on. "And Elena? You did better than I expected. Don't make me regret saying that." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the cabin with the fire and the silence and the strange, unfamiliar sensation of having done something difficult without anyone praising or condemning her for it. Elena spent the afternoon exploring the cabin more carefully. Every shelf revealed something: books on wilderness survival, plant identification, basic medicine. Jars of preserved food labeled with dates and contents in neat handwriting. Tools maintained with obvious care. A journal tucked between two books, which Elena didn't touch despite her curiosity. This was a life. Not just survival, but actual life. Chosen, built, maintained. And for the first time since Caleb had destroyed her at the altar, Elena felt something other than grief or rage or that hollow numbness. She felt possibility. When Kael returned as the sun was setting, carrying 2 more rabbits and a grouse, Elena had managed to keep the fire going and had even prepared a simple meal from the supplies she'd found. He looked at the food on the table, dried meat rehydrated in broth, some kind of root vegetables, and raised an eyebrow. "You can cook?" "I can follow instructions." Everything was labeled. He sat, began eating without ceremony. Elena joined him, and they ate in silence that felt less hostile than the day before. More like 2 people sharing space because it made practical sense. "Your fingers going to be okay?" Kael asked finally. Elena flexed them, testing. They still hurt, but the color had returned. "I think so." "Good. Tomorrow we start for real." He met her eyes across the table. "I'm not agreeing to let you stay permanently, but I'll teach you the basics, enough that you can make an informed decision about whether this life is something you actually want or just something you're running toward because you're running from something else." "That's fair," Elena said. "It's not fair, it's practical. Fair would be sending you back to town right now because having another person here complicates everything I've built." He stood, began clearing the dishes. "But I'm curious. I want to see if you're actually different, or if you're just like everyone else who thinks they want freedom until they realize what it cost." "And if I'm different?" Kael was quiet for a moment, his back to her as he washed dishes in the basin. "Then maybe you stay. Or maybe you take what you learn and build your own life somewhere else. Either way, you'll have made a real choice instead of just reacting to what someone else did to you." That night, Elena lay in the bed that was becoming familiar, listening to Kael's breathing even out in his makeshift pallet by the fire. Her body ached with an exhaustion she'd never known existed, but her mind was clearer than it had been in years. She thought about Caleb, about the church, about her father, and the debt, and the whole impossible situation that had led her into the snow. And she realized that for the first time since it happened, she could think about it without that crushing weight in her chest. The humiliation was still there. The anger. The grief for the life she'd thought she'd have. But it felt distant now, like it had happened to someone else. Someone weaker. Someone who'd believed that other people's opinions mattered more than her own survival. Tomorrow Kael would teach her something else. Something about how to exist in this brutal, beautiful place without the cushion of civilization to protect her from consequences. And she would learn it, or she would fail, but either way it would be real. For someone who'd spent 24 years living a carefully constructed fiction, real sounded like exactly what she needed. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. But the cabin was warm, the fire steady, and Elena Cross, who'd been left at an altar in a wedding dress 3 days ago, closed her eyes and slept without dreaming. The mountain had tested her and found her wanting. But the test, it turned out, had just begun. And unlike the life she'd left behind, out here failing didn't mean shame. It just meant you tried again tomorrow, or you didn't, and the mountain wouldn't judge either way. It would just wait, patient and absolute, to see what you were made of. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. The days that followed developed a rhythm that felt ancient, primal. Wake before dawn, build the fire, eat whatever Kael had prepared, usually something involving meat Elena had watched him dress the day before. Then out into the cold for lessons that had nothing to do with books or classrooms and everything to do with staying alive. Kael didn't teach the way anyone had ever taught Elena before. There were no explanations of theory, no breakdown of concepts into digestible pieces. He simply did things, and she was expected to watch, understand, and replicate. If she failed, he showed her once more. If she failed again, he walked away and let the consequences teach her what his words wouldn't. On the 4th day, he handed her an axe. "Split that pile." He pointed to a stack of logs near the woodshed. "I'll be checking the eastern traps. When I get back, it should be done." Elena stared at the axe, then at the logs. She'd never split wood in her life. How? But Kael was already walking away, snowshoes strapped on, rifle slung over his shoulder. He didn't look back. Elena approached the woodpile the way she imagined someone might approach a wild animal, cautious, uncertain, aware of the potential for injury. She'd watched Kyle split wood every morning with that same mechanical efficiency he brought to everything. It had looked simple, rhythmic, almost meditative. The first swing told her how wrong she'd been. The axe bounced off the log with a jarring impact that sent shockwaves up her arms and nearly made her drop the handle. The wood didn't split, didn't even crack, just sat there, mocking her incompetence. Elena tried again, and again. By the 10th attempt, her shoulders were burning, and she'd managed to produce exactly one split log, and several that were mangled with partial cuts going in random directions. By the 20th attempt, she was crying, not from sadness, but from pure physical frustration. Her hands were blistered even through the work gloves Kael had given her. Her back screamed with every swing. And the pile of unsplit logs seemed to grow rather than shrink. But she kept going, because Kael had said it should be done when he returned, and some stubborn part of Elena that she hadn't known existed refused to prove him right about her weakness. She adjusted her grip, trying to remember the exact way Kael's hands had held the axe. She changed her stance, widening her feet for better balance. She aimed for the cracks in the wood grain rather than just swinging wildly. And slowly, painfully slowly, the pile of split wood began to grow. When Kael returned as the sun was setting, Elena was on her last log. Her entire body shook with exhaustion. Blood from broken blisters had soaked through the gloves, but the pile was split. Kael surveyed her work without comment. He walked the perimeter of the woodpile, examining the pieces, noting the uneven cuts and the mangled rejects Elena had tried to hide at the bottom. Then he looked at her hands. "Show me." Elena pulled off the gloves. Her palms were raw, several blisters had burst, and there was definitely blood. Kael's expression didn't change. "Inside, wash them with soap, then we'll bandage them properly." He didn't say she'd done well, didn't acknowledge the accomplishment, just moved on to the next necessary thing, which was preventing infection and preparing for tomorrow. That night, as he wrapped her hands with clean cloth and some kind of salve that smelled like pine and something medicinal, Elena finally asked the question that had been building. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Teaching me, letting me stay. You said you don't do charity cases, but you're spending time and resources on someone who showed up half dead in the snow." Kael finished wrapping her left hand before answering. "You want the truth or the polite version?" "There's a polite version?" "No, that was a test." He started on her right hand, his movements careful despite the roughness of his hands. "I'm doing this because I'm curious whether you'll quit. Most people would have quit by now, gone back to town, found some other solution, convinced themselves that comfort was worth the cost. You haven't. Maybe I'm just too stubborn to know when I'm beaten." "Stubborn is useful. Stupidity is fatal. The difference is knowing which one you're being at any given moment." He tied off the bandage. "These will hurt tomorrow. Wear the gloves anyway. Your hands need to toughen up." The next morning, Kael taught her to shoot. They walked to a clearing about half a mile from the cabin, and he set up targets, chunks of wood at varying distances. Then he handed her the rifle. "This is a Remington 700 bolt-action .308 caliber, holds 4 rounds. He showed her how to load it, his movement slow enough that she could follow. "Safety here, bolt here. Trigger pull is about 4 pounds, so don't jerk it. Squeeze smooth." Elena held the rifle awkwardly, its weight unfamiliar, the cold metal burning through her gloves, even though the morning was frigid. Stock goes into your shoulder, tight, or the recoil will bruise you. Cheek against the stock. Look through the scope. That crosshair is where the bullet goes if you do everything right. And if I do everything wrong? Then you waste ammunition, scare the game, and possibly shoot yourself in the foot, all of which would be disappointing but educational. He stepped back. Closest target, fire when ready. Elena tried to remember everything he'd said. Stock to shoulder, cheek to stock, crosshair on target. The world reduced to that small circle of magnified vision, the chunk of wood sitting innocently in the snow. She pulled the trigger. The recoil was shocking, a physical force that slammed into her shoulder and knocked her back a step. The sound echoed through the forest, impossibly loud, and the target sat undisturbed, the snow around it unmarked. "You closed your eyes," Kyle said, "and you tensed right before the shot, which pulled your aim left. Again." She fired 4 more times, Missed 4 more times. Each shot was a small failure that accumulated into proof of inadequacy. Reload, Kale instructed. Elena fumbled with the bolt, the rounds, her bandaged hands clumsy. She got the rifle loaded again and looked at Kyle, expecting judgment, criticism, some acknowledgement of how badly she was doing. Instead, he just nodded toward the targets. Again. They spent 3 hours in that clearing. Elena fired until her shoulder was one massive bruise, until the sound of gunshots stopped making her flinch, until she could load the rifle without thinking about each step. And somewhere around the 40th shot, something clicked. The target was just wood. The rifle was just a tool. The process was just physics, trajectory, wind, breath control. She relaxed into the stance, let her breath out slowly, squeezed the trigger the way Kyle had shown her. The target exploded into fragments. There, Kale said, the closest thing to approval she'd heard from him. Do it again. She did it again. And again. By the time they walked back to the cabin, Elena had hit the target more times than she'd missed, and her shoulder hurt so badly she could barely lift her arm. You're a decent shot, Kyle said as they cleaned the rifle that evening. Better than decent, actually. You've got steady hands and you don't panic. With practice, you could be good. It was the first real compliment he'd given her, and Elena felt something warm bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the stove. The days accumulated into a week, then 2. Elena learned to set traps, to read animal tracks, to distinguish between plants that could feed you and plants that could kill you. She learned to start fires in the wind, to purify water from streams, to navigate by the sun and stars when the trails disappeared under fresh snow. She learned that her body was capable of far more than she'd believed possible. That pain was just information, exhaustion was temporary, and comfort was a luxury you could live without once you stopped expecting it. But more than the practical skills, she learned something else. She learned what it felt like to fail without an audience, to succeed without applause, to exist in a space where her worth wasn't measured by other people's opinions, but by tangible, measurable results. And slowly, the woman who'd run from the church in a wedding dress became someone else, someone harder, someone capable. It was the beginning of the 3rd week when everything changed. Elena was inside the cabin preparing the grouse Kyle had brought back from the morning's hunt when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong, the distant growl of engines, multiple vehicles fighting through snow-blocked roads. Kyle heard it too. He was at the window immediately, his body tense in a way Elena had never seen before. "We have company," he said flatly. "Who would come out here in this weather? People looking for something they think they own." He moved to the gun cabinet, pulled out the rifle and a shotgun, began loading both with quick, practiced movements. "Get your coat. We're going outside." Elena's heart was hammering now, some primal part of her brain recognizing danger even before she understood what was happening. She pulled on the heavy coat, the boots that fit her now after Kyle had shown her how to add extra insoles, and followed him into the clearing. The engine sounds were closer now, and through the trees Elena could see movement, dark shapes, vehicles, people. Too many people. "Stay behind me," Kyle said quietly. "Don't speak unless I tell you to. And if I say run, you run toward the north ridge and don't look back. There's a cave about 2 miles up. You'll recognize it by the split pine at the entrance. Supplies are cached there. You wait 3 days. If I don't come, you head west until you hit the highway." "Kyle, what's happening?" "Your past just caught up with you." The first vehicle broke through the tree line, a heavy-duty truck with chains on the tires, fitted for mountain terrain. Behind it came 2 more, and as they stopped and doors opened, Elena counted 6 men, 7, 8. And then she saw him. Caleb Drayton stepped out of the lead truck wearing an expensive winter coat and boots that had never seen real use. Behind him, her father emerged from the second vehicle, looking smaller somehow, older, broken by whatever had brought him here. "Elena!" Lawrence Cross's voice cracked across the clearing. "Elena, thank heaven, we thought—" "That's far enough." Cale's voice cut through her father's relief like a blade. He hadn't raised the rifle yet, but his hands were positioned in a way that suggested he could do so very quickly. "This is private property. You're trespassing." Caleb laughed, the sound carrying a confidence that came from never having faced real consequences. "Private property? This is federal forest land. You don't own anything out here, mountain man. The cabin and 5 acres around it are registered and paid for. You're standing on acre 3. Cale's voice remained level, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders. Turn around and go back. We're not leaving without her. Caleb pointed at Elena, and she saw something dangerous in his eyes. Something that had nothing to do with love or concern, and everything to do with pride. Elena Cross belongs in Millbrook Hollow with her family, where she can face the consequences of her choices. What consequences? Elena heard herself say, stepping out from behind Kyle despite his earlier instruction. What consequences could possibly be worse than what you did to me in that church? Her father pushed forward, and 2 of the men, Elena recognized them now as Drayton employees, men who'd worked construction projects with her father, moved with him. Elena, please, the debt. Edmund called it in early. We have 30 days now instead of 90. I need you to come back, need you to talk to the Draytons, to fix this. Fix this? Elena felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. You want me to fix the mess you made? The debt you accumulated? The life you gambled away? You're my daughter? I was your daughter. The words came out harder than Elena intended, but she didn't take them back. I stopped being your daughter when you sold me to pay your debts. When you stood in that church and watched Caleb humiliate me without saying a word. Lawrence's face crumpled. I didn't know he was going to Yes, you did. Elena took a step forward, and she felt Kyle shift beside her, ready to intervene if necessary. You knew exactly what kind of man he was. You just didn't care as long as he cleared your debt. Touching, Caleb interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Family drama in the snow, but we're not here to negotiate. Elena, you're coming back with us, willingly or otherwise. Otherwise? Kyle spoke for the first time since the confrontation started, and his voice had dropped into a register that made Elena's skin prickle. You're threatening her? I'm promising her. The local sheriff has paperwork. Her father filed a missing person report the day after she disappeared. There are search and rescue teams looking for her body. When we bring her back alive, there will be questions about why she didn't return on her own, about who might have kept her here against her will. Elena felt the trap closing even before Caleb finished speaking. Of course he'd thought of this. Caleb Drayton didn't lose, not publicly, not in ways that made him look bad. If Elena had run away out of shame, that reflected poorly on him. But if she'd been kidnapped, held captive by some crazy mountain hermit, then he was the hero who'd rescued her. I'm not being held against my will, Elena said clearly. I chose to stay here. I choose to stay here now. Then you're choosing to let your father lose everything. Caleb's smile was sharp. The house, the business, his reputation, all of it, gone in 30 days. And everyone in Millbrook Hollow will know it's because his daughter was too selfish, too ungrateful to come home and do her duty. Her duty? Kale's voice had an edge now. Her duty is to what, exactly? Marry a man who publicly humiliated her? Sacrifice her life for her father's failures? Her duty is to family, to community, to the civilized world you clearly abandoned a long time ago. Caleb looked Cale up and down with obvious disdain. What are you, anyway? Some kind of crazy survivalist hiding from society? You think you can keep her out here playing house in the wilderness? I think she's an adult who can make her own decisions. She's a confused young woman who ran away after a traumatic experience. She needs help, therapy, support from people who actually care about her. Elena laughed, the sound harsh and unexpected. People who care about me? Is that what you are, Caleb? Someone who cares? Because I remember very clearly what you said in that church, how adequate I wasn't, how my father's shame made me worthless. I was angry, Caleb said, but his tone suggested this was a script he'd prepared, not genuine remorse. I said things I regret, things we can work past if you come home, if you let me make this right. Make this right. Elena repeated the words slowly, tasting the lie in them. You don't want to make anything right. You want to salvage your reputation. You want to turn this humiliation into a redemption story where you're the hero. One of the men behind Caleb shifted, and Elena saw he was carrying something, not a gun, but a radio. Communication equipment, which meant there were probably more people, more vehicles, more of everything that civilization could bring to bear against 2 people in a cabin. Last chance, Caleb said, his patience clearly wearing thin. Come back now. We'll call off the search, tell everyone you were found safe and unharmed, and we'll work out a new arrangement, one that benefits everyone. And if I refuse, then we take you back anyway. And your friend here gets investigated for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and whatever else the county prosecutor can dream up. I have 8 witnesses who'll testify that you were clearly being held against your will, that you looked terrified, that he threatened us when we tried to rescue you. Kyle's hand moved to the rifle, but he didn't raise it. You'd perjure yourselves? All of you? We'd tell the truth as we saw it. Caleb's smile was poisonous. Traumatized woman, isolated cabin, armed hermit. The narrative writes itself. Elena felt the weight of the choice pressing down on her. Go back and condemn Kyle to legal destruction, or stay and watch it happen anyway when they forced her to leave. There was no winning move here. Caleb had thought of everything, prepared for every contingency, but he'd made one miscalculation. He'd assumed Elena was still the woman who'd stood at that altar, the woman who'd been trained to be accommodating, to smooth over conflict, to sacrifice herself for other people's comfort. That woman was gone. You need to leave, Elena said quietly. All of you. Now. Elena, her father started. No, you don't get to Elena me. You don't get to show up here with ultimatums and expect me to fold because it's easier than fighting. I've spent 3 weeks learning what real hardship looks like, what actual survival requires, and I'm done being manipulated by people who think guilt and obligation are the same as love. Be reasonable. I am being reasonable. You're the ones who drove hours through dangerous conditions to force someone to come back to a place where she was publicly destroyed. That's not reasonable. That's obsession. Caleb's expression hardened. You think you can just walk away from your responsibilities? From your family? From the world? I already did. Elena moved to stand beside Kyle, and she felt his presence like a wall at her back, solid, unmoving, absolutely dependable. You want me back in Millbrook Hollow? You'll have to drag me, and I promise you I won't go quietly, I won't go willingly, and everyone you threatened Kyle with, I'll tell them the truth. About the debt, about the wedding, about what you said to me in that church. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who Caleb Drayton really is. For the first time since he'd arrived, Caleb looked uncertain. The narrative he'd constructed depended on Elena being compliant, broken, grateful for rescue. Her defiance was destroying that script. You'll regret this, he said finally. Maybe, but it'll be my regret. My choice. Not something someone else forced on me. The standoff held for another long moment. 8 men against 2 people, superior numbers and resources against determination and high ground. Then Edmund Drayton emerged from one of the trucks, and Elena saw where Caleb had learned his cruelty. Enough! Edmund's voice carried absolute authority. Lawrence, control your daughter. She won't listen to me. Then she'll learn the hard way. 30 days, Lawrence. The full amount, plus interest, plus penalties for early termination. If you can't pay, we start seizing assets. He looked at Elena with eyes like chips of ice. And when you're living in a shelter because your father lost everything, when you're begging on street corners because you have no family left to take you in, remember this moment. Remember that you chose pride over duty. I'll remember, Elena said. I'll remember all of it. Edmund climbed back into his truck. The others followed his lead, and slowly the convoy began turning around in the clearing, engines growling against the snow. Caleb was the last to leave, and his parting look promised that this wasn't over. But Elena didn't care. Let him promise. Let him threaten. Out here, none of it mattered. The trucks disappeared into the forest, and the sound of engines faded. Elena stood in the clearing with Kyle, watching the trail where they'd vanished, waiting for her hands to stop shaking. That was stupid, Kyle said finally. Probably. You just made enemies of some very powerful people. I know. And your father's going to lose everything. I know that too. Elena turned to look at him. Are you going to tell me I should have gone with them? Kyle studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable. Then he shook his head. No, I'm going to tell you that you just declared war and wars have casualties. If you're going to stay here, if you're going to make this choice permanent, you need to be ready for what comes next. What comes next? They'll be back. Maybe not today, maybe not next week. But men like that don't accept defeat. They'll find a way to force the issue, to make you choosing me look like I kidnapped you, to turn this into something that justifies their violence. Then we'll be ready. We. Kale's expression was complicated. You're sure about this? About staying? About making this mountain your home instead of going back to civilization and finding some other life? Elena looked at the cabin behind them, at the forest stretching in every direction, at the mountains rising against the sky like sentinels. She thought about split wood and rifle practice and frozen fingers and the absolute clarity of living in a place where every choice had immediate, visible consequences. I'm sure, she said. Kael nodded slowly. Then he handed her the rifle. Then you need to get better with this. Because if they come back, you're going to need to be able to defend yourself. I won't always be able to protect you. I don't want protection, Elena said, taking the rifle and checking it the way he'd taught her. I want to be dangerous. For the first time since she'd met him, Kael smiled. It was brief, barely there, but genuine. Then let's make you dangerous. They walked back into the cabin together, and Elena felt the weight of what she'd just done settling into her bones. She'd chosen the mountain, chosen hardship over comfort, truth over convenience, herself over everyone who'd tried to define her worth by their own needs. There would be consequences. She knew that. Her father would lose his house, his business, possibly his place in the community. Caleb would find ways to hurt her from a distance. The whole town would talk, would judge, would turn her into exactly the cautionary tale Kael had predicted. But she would be free. And freedom, Elena was learning, was worth almost any price. The training intensified after that day. What had been lessons became preparation, and what had been survival skills became weapons. Kael pushed Elena harder, woke her earlier, demanded more until she stopped thinking of her body as something that could break and started seeing it as something that could be forged. 3 days after the confrontation, he woke her at 4 a.m. Get dressed, full gear, we're going up the mountain. Elena pulled on layers in the dark. Base layer, wool shirt, fleece, waterproof shell. Boots, gloves, hat. She'd learned to dress for the cold the way soldiers dress for battle, each piece serving a specific purpose. By the time she emerged from the cabin, Kael was already waiting with 2 packs loaded with supplies. What's in the mountain? Elena asked, strapping on snowshoes. Context. Kael started walking, his headlamp cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. You need to see the full territory, where the advantages are, where the weaknesses lie. If they come back, we need to control the terrain. They climbed for hours. The grade was steep, the snow deep, and Elena's lungs burned with the thin air and exertion. But her body, the same body that had nearly died in a wedding dress 4 weeks ago, kept moving. Her legs, strengthened by daily trapline circuits, powered through the ascent. Her hands, calloused now from axe and rifle, gripped her walking poles with confidence. As the sun rose, the world revealed itself in layers. The valley spread below them like a map, Millbrook Hollow barely visible in the distance, the cabin a tiny dark spot among the trees. Above, the mountain continued its climb toward a peak that pierced the cloud line. Kael stopped at a rocky outcrop and pointed. 3 approaches to the cabin. South Road. That's where they came from. It's the easiest route, which means it's where they'll come again if they're not thinking tactically. East Trail, narrower and steeper, harder to navigate with vehicles. And West Ridge, which requires climbing and can only be done on foot. He moved his finger across the landscape like a general planning a campaign. If they're smart, they'll split up. Block the South Road, send a team up the East Trail, maybe put scouts on the West Ridge to cut off our escape routes. And if they do that, then we make them regret it. Kael pulled a worn notebook from his pack, sketched quickly. The South Road has a natural choke point here where the ravine narrows. The East Trail crosses a slope that's prone to slides this time of year. And the West Ridge, he smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. The West Ridge is where we'd want them to go. It looks passable, but it's treacherous. One wrong step and you're sliding 500 feet down a cliff face. Elena studied the sketch, committing it to memory. You're talking about killing them. I'm talking about survival. If they come for you, Elena, they won't come to talk. They'll come with force, with authority, with every advantage wealth and law can provide. The only equalizer we have is knowing this mountain better than they ever could. Have you done this before? Defended this place? Kael was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant valley. 7 years ago, I had different people looking for me, people with badges and warrants, and very good reasons to drag me back to the world I'd left. I made sure they understood that coming up here would cost more than they were willing to pay. What did you do? Made the mountain defend itself. Avalanche warnings that turned real when they ignored them. Trails that disappeared when they needed them most. Equipment failures that seemed like bad luck but weren't luck at all. He looked at her directly. I didn't kill anyone, but I made sure they understood that the mountain might, and that I wouldn't stop it from happening. Elena absorbed this, understanding the man beside her in a new way. He wasn't just surviving out here. He was protecting something, a life built deliberately, away from whatever he'd run from. What were you running from? She asked. Same thing you were. A world that wanted to define me by their standards instead of mine. He stood, shouldered his pack. The difference is I'd already tried playing by their rules. Military, corporate job, marriage, mortgage, all of it. And it nearly destroyed me. So I chose this instead. They continued climbing. At the summit, Kyle showed her a cache hidden among the rocks. Supplies, ammunition, a radio that he checked, and then resealed in its waterproof container. Emergency shelter is here. He pointed to a depression in the rocks that would be invisible from below. Water source here. If we ever get separated, if something happens and you need to disappear, this is where you come. You can survive up here for weeks if you're careful. Why are you showing me this? Because you need to know. Because preparation is the difference between surviving and dying. He met her eyes. And because I won't let them take you back to a life that was killing you just as surely as that blizzard would have. Something shifted between them in that moment. What had been a practical arrangement, teacher and student, grudging host and unexpected guest, became something else. Partnership, maybe. Or the beginning of understanding that survival was easier when you weren't alone. They descended as afternoon shadows lengthened, and when they reached the cabin, Elena felt different, stronger, more certain. The mountain wasn't just geography anymore. It was arsenal, ally, home. That night, as they cleaned rifles and checked supplies, Kyle spoke without looking at her. I need to teach you something else. Something harder. What? How to hurt someone. How to fight when fighting is the only option left. Elena set down the cleaning rod she'd been using. I don't know how to fight. I know. That's the problem. Kyle stood, moved to the open space near the door. Most self-defense training is garbage. It teaches you to escape, to run, to wait for help. Out here, there is no help. There's just you and whatever you're willing to do to survive. He gestured for her to stand. Come at me like you're trying to hurt me. Elena hesitated. Kyle was taller, stronger, hardened by years of physical labor. The idea of attacking him felt absurd. Now, Elena. She moved forward awkwardly, reaching for him the way she imagined someone might in a fight, hands out, grabbing for his shirt. Kyle moved so fast she didn't see it coming. One moment she was reaching for him, the next she was on her back on the floor. The air knocked from her lungs, his hand at her throat in a grip that was controlled but absolute. That's how fast you die if you don't know what you're doing. He released her, offered a hand up. Again. This time, think about targets. Eyes, throat, groin, knees, soft places that hurt when you hit them. They trained for hours. Kale showed her how to turn her weakness into advantage, how to use an attacker's momentum against them, how to target vulnerable points with precision, how to make every movement count because she wouldn't get second chances. Elena fell, got up, fell again. Her body collected bruises, but each one came with a lesson. By the time Kyle called an end to the session, she was exhausted, hurting, and more confident than she'd ever felt in her life. You're a quick learner, Kyle said, and coming from him it felt like high praise. But learning and doing are different. When they come back, and they will come back, you need to be ready to actually hurt someone, not just go through the motions. I understand. Do you? He sat down heavily, and Elena saw the weariness in him that he usually hid. Violence isn't noble. It's not clean. When you hurt someone, really hurt them, it changes you. You need to be prepared for that. Elena sat across from him, her body aching but her mind clear. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to not go back. That's all the preparation I need. Kyle studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we work on traps. But sleep didn't come easily that night. Elena lay in the bed that had become hers, listening to the familiar sounds of the cabin settling, Kael's breathing evening out by the fire. She thought about her father, probably losing his house right now, watching his world collapse because his daughter had chosen herself over his salvation. She thought about Caleb, plotting his next move, convinced that she could still be forced back into line. And she thought about what Kael had said, that violence changed you. She wondered if she'd already changed, if the woman who'd run into the blizzard was already so different from who she'd been that going back would be impossible, even if she wanted to. The answer came with surprising clarity. She had changed, and she wasn't done changing yet. 2 weeks passed in a state of heightened awareness. Every sound in the forest was analyzed. Every vehicle engine heard in the distance was marked. Kael set up a network of early warning systems, tripwires that triggered bells, subtle markers on the trails that would tell them if someone passed. They took turns on watch, sleeping in shifts, maintaining constant vigilance. And the training continued. Elena learned to move silently through the forest, to read weather patterns, to make fire from damp wood, and find food where there seemed to be none. She learned the mountain's moods, its dangers, its gifts. But more than that, she learned herself. Learned that she was capable of endurance she'd never imagined. That discomfort was temporary, but weakness was a choice. That the voice in her head that said she couldn't do something was a liar that could be ignored. On the 15th day, the radio in the summit cache crackled to life. Kael had been teaching Elena to skin a deer, careful cuts that preserve the hide, when they heard it. Static, then voices, distorted by distance and interference. They looked at each other, then ran. The climb that had taken hours their first time took 90 minutes now. Elena's body, transformed by weeks of work, powered up the slope with efficiency that would have seemed impossible a month ago. They reached the summit as the sun was setting, and Kael pulled the radio from its container. Coordinates confirmed. Southeast approach appears most viable. Assault team will stage at the service road terminus and proceed on foot. Rules of engagement are non-lethal, but necessary force is authorized. Kael shut off the radio. His face had gone hard, dangerous. That was county tactical, sheriff's department. They're really coming with a SWAT team? Assault team, different name, same result. They're treating this like a hostage situation. He was already moving, repacking the radio, checking the area to make sure they left no trace. We have maybe 12 hours. They'll stage overnight and move at dawn. They descended in darkness, using headlamps only when absolutely necessary. Elena's mind raced, calculating, planning. 12 hours. Dawn assault. Southeast approach. When they reached the cabin, Kael was already in motion. He pulled weapons from the cabinet, ammunition, supplies. His movements were military precise, someone who'd done this before. "We're not staying here," he said. "They'll surround the cabin, try to box us in. We need to be mobile, unpredictable." "Where do we go?" "The mountain. We use what I showed you, the terrain, the weather, everything." He handed her a pack already loaded with essentials. "We make them understand that taking you isn't worth what it's going to cost them." Elena shouldered the pack, checked her rifle, felt the weight of the knife on her belt. 4 weeks ago, she'd been helpless in the snow. Now she was something else entirely. "What's the plan?" Kael smiled, and it was the wolf's smile, all teeth and promise of danger. "We make them chase us. Up the mountain, through terrain they can't handle, in conditions they're not prepared for. We exhaust them, demoralize them, and make them realize that every step forward is a step closer to disaster. And if they don't give up, then we make the mountain do what mountains do. Avalanches, rock slides, exposure, none of it will look intentional, just the natural consequences of stupid people making stupid choices." They worked through the night, preparing. Kael showed Elena how to set up triggered slides, how to weaken snow bridges over crevasses, how to make trails look passable when they were death traps. It was ruthless, efficient, and completely necessary. "You understand what we're doing?" Kael asked as they worked. "We're not just defending ourselves. We're teaching them a lesson. That you can't be taken. That trying costs more than any victory is worth." "I understand." "And you're okay with it? With potentially causing serious harm to people who are just doing their jobs?" Elena thought about the church, about Caleb's cruel smile. about her father's willingness to sell her to save himself. She thought about what going back would mean: submission, defeat, the death of whoever she was becoming. They have a choice, she said. They can turn around at any point. I don't have that choice. This is my life now, my home, and I'll defend it. Cale looked at her with something that might have been pride. Then let's defend it. They left the cabin before dawn, carrying everything essential, destroying nothing but taking everything that mattered. They moved north, then east, then up, a zigzag pattern that would be hard to follow, harder to predict. Behind them, Elena heard the first sounds of the assault team arriving. Engines, voices, the organized chaos of a tactical operation. She didn't look back. That world was behind her now, literally and figuratively. They climbed through terrain that made the previous ascents look easy. Cale pushed the pace, testing Elena's limits, and she met every challenge. Her body, lean and hardened now, moved with confidence over obstacles that would have stopped her weeks ago. By mid-morning, they'd reached a position above the cabin with clear sightlines. Through binoculars, Elena watched the tactical team sweep the empty structure. She counted 12 people, all armed, all wearing gear that marked them as professionals. "They'll find our trail soon," Cale said. "When they do, they'll follow. Let them." They moved higher. The trail they left was deliberate, obvious enough to follow, subtle enough to seem like they were trying to hide it. Classic misdirection, leading the pursuit exactly where they wanted it to go. The terrain grew more treacherous, snow-covered slopes that hid ice underneath, rock fields that shifted with each step, narrow passes where one wrong move meant falling. Elena moved through it all with Cale's training guiding her, and behind them, the pursuit struggled. By afternoon, they reached the position Cale had scouted, a cliff face with a narrow traverse, backed by a massive snow cornice that had built up over the winter. Unstable, dangerous, waiting for the right trigger to collapse. "This is where we make our stand," Cale said. "They'll have to cross that traverse to reach us. And when they do..." He showed her the rope he'd rigged weeks ago in preparation for exactly this scenario. One pull and the cornice would collapse, sending tons of snow down the slope below the traverse. Not enough to kill anyone unless they were incredibly unlucky, but enough to bury equipment, block the route, and send a very clear message. They waited. Elena lay in the snow beside Cale, rifle ready, watching the traverse below. The cold that had nearly killed her a month ago was just background now, something her body had learned to manage. The first tactical officer appeared on the traverse around 3 in the afternoon. He moved carefully, testing each step, clearly aware of the danger. Behind him came others, spreading out, taking positions. Elena counted 8 of them making the crossing. 8 people who'd been sent to rescue someone who didn't want rescuing, who were risking their lives because rich men had convinced them it was necessary. "Last chance," Cale called down, his voice carrying across the mountain. "Turn back now. This gets worse from here." The lead officer stopped, looked up at their position. He was wearing tactical gear, but his face was visible. Young, maybe 30, someone's son or husband or brother. "Ma'am, are you Elena Cross?" he called up. Elena stood, making herself visible. "I am." "Ma'am, we're here to bring you home safely. Your family is very worried about you." "This is my home, and I'm safe. Please leave." "Can't do that, ma'am. We have reports you're being held against your will." "Mama." "Do I look like I'm being held against my will?" Elena spread her arms, showing her rifle, her gear, her complete freedom of movement. "I'm here by choice, my own choice, and I'm asking you as clearly as I can to leave." The officer hesitated. Behind him, his team waited. Elena could see the uncertainty in his posture, the recognition that this wasn't what he'd been briefed to expect. "Ma'am, I have orders, and I have the right to determine my own life." Elena's voice was steady, clear. "You can see I'm not in danger. You can see I'm not being forced, so your mission is complete. You found me, you confirmed I'm safe. Now you can go." Another voice came from behind the tactical line, older, carrying authority. "Officer Reeves, continue the operation. We have legal authority to extract her by force if necessary." Elena recognized the voice even before she saw him. County Sheriff Marcus Denton, who'd been friends with Edmund Drayton for 20 years, who owed the Drayton family multiple favors, who'd been appointed rather than elected. Sheriff, with respect, she's clearly not being held, Officer Reeves started. She's clearly been manipulated by her captor. Continue the operation. Kael's hand found the rope. Elena looked at him, then at the officers below, then back at Kael. The choice crystallized in that moment. Back down now, and everything she'd built, everything she'd become, would collapse. Stand firm and people might get hurt. But they had been warned. They had been given every chance to turn back. Your choice, Elena called down to the officers. You've seen I'm safe. You can report that and leave. Or you can follow illegal orders from a corrupt sheriff and face the consequences. Last warning, Kael added. The mountain doesn't care about your orders or your authority. It only cares about physics. And right now, the physics aren't in your favor. Sheriff Denton pushed forward. Officer Reeves, that is a direct order. Advance and secure the suspect. Kael pulled the rope. The cornice collapsed with a sound like thunder. Thousands of pounds of snow broke free and roared down the slope, a white wave that consumed everything in its path. Elena watched the tactical team scatter, diving for cover, pressing against the cliff face as the avalanche swept past. The snow didn't hit them directly. Kael had calculated the trajectory carefully, but it buried the traverse, blocked the route, and sent a pillar of snow dust 50 feet into the air. When it settled, the passage below was impassable, and the tactical team was cut off from retreat, pinned against the cliff face. You're insane, Sheriff Denton's voice, shrill with panic. You could have killed us. But we didn't, Kael called back, because unlike you, we actually care whether people live or die. Now you get to spend the night on that ledge thinking about the choices that brought you here. In the morning, if you're smart, you'll retreat. If you're stubborn, we'll make the next lesson more expensive. They didn't wait for a response. Elena and Kael moved quickly along the cliff face, using routes they'd scouted, putting distance between themselves and the trapped team. Behind them, she heard radios crackling, voices shouting, the chaos of a mission falling apart. That night, they camped in the summit shelter, huddled against wind that screamed across the peak. Elena should have been cold, frightened, uncertain. Instead, she felt alive in a way she never had before. They'll send more, she said. This won't end with one failed operation. Maybe, Kael agreed. Or maybe they'll realize you're not worth it. That letting you stay is easier than continuing to chase you up a mountain that's actively trying to kill them. And if they don't realize that, Kael looked at her across the small fire they'd built in the shelter. Then we keep teaching them until they do. Until they understand that you belong to yourself, not to them. That your choices matter more than their convenience. Elena fed another stick into the fire, watched the flames consume it. Thank you. For what? For not giving up on me, for teaching me, for... She gestured at the mountain, the stars, the vast wilderness that was her home now. For showing me there was another way to live. Kael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I didn't do anything except not stop you from doing it yourself. You're the one who chose this, who fought for it, who became strong enough to defend it. Still, I wouldn't have survived without you, and I wouldn't have bothered teaching you if you weren't worth teaching. He smiled slightly. Turns out I don't hate having someone else around, as long as that someone can pull their own weight and doesn't complain about the accommodations. Elena laughed, surprising herself. A month ago, laughter had seemed impossible. Now it came easily, naturally, the product of something that felt dangerously close to happiness. Below them, lights flickered where the tactical team was camped on their ledge, trapped by the avalanche until morning. Elena felt no guilt. They'd been warned. They'd chosen to continue. And now they were learning what Kael had tried to teach her from the beginning. The mountain didn't care about your plans. It didn't negotiate. It simply was. And you either adapted to its reality or you suffered. She'd chosen to adapt, to become part of this place rather than fight against it. And in doing so, she'd found something she'd never had in Millbrook Hollow. She'd found herself. Dawn broke over the mountain in shades of copper and gold, and Elena woke to find Kael already at the shelter entrance, watching the tactical team through binoculars. She joined him, her body stiff from sleeping on stone but functional, resilient in ways it had never been before. They're packing up, Kael said, handing her the binoculars. Smart move. Another night out here and they'd start dealing with real cold injuries. Elena watched the tiny figures below dig themselves out from the avalanche debris, moving slowly, carefully. One of them kept looking up toward the summit as if trying to spot their position. Officer Reeves, maybe. The young one who'd hesitated when given orders that didn't match what his eyes were telling him. Will they come back? Elena asked. Maybe, but not today. Not with the same confidence. Kael stood, began breaking down their minimal camp. They'll report what happened. Sheriff Denton will spin it however serves him best. And then someone will have to decide if pursuing you is worth more casualties. They descended using a different route, one that took them wide around the tactical team's position. By the time they reached the tree line, the sun was fully up and the forest had come alive with the sounds of birds and wind through branches. Normal sounds, safe sounds. The cabin stood undisturbed when they arrived, but everything felt different now. The space that had been Kael's solitary refuge had become something shared, defended, claimed by both of them through choice and action. We should eat, Kael said, moving to the supplies. Real food, rest. Then we need to have a conversation about what comes next. Elena knew what he meant. The tactical team had retreated, but the underlying problem remained. Caleb and Edmund Drayton wouldn't stop. Her father's debt wouldn't disappear. And eventually someone would come up with a new strategy, a new approach, a new way to try and force her back. They ate in silence, dried meat, preserved vegetables, bread that Kael had baked 2 days ago. Simple food, but earned food. And it tasted better than anything Elena remembered from her old life. I can't stay here forever, Elena said finally. Not like this. Not with you constantly watching for the next attack, with both of us living in a state of siege. Kael looked at her across the table, his gray eyes steady. What are you saying? I'm saying we need to end this, permanently. Elena set down her cup with deliberate care. Not by running, not by hiding, but by making it clear to everyone that I'm not coming back. Ever. In a way they can't ignore or reinterpret. You want to go back to town? I want to go back one time. On my terms. And make them understand that Elena Cross, the woman they knew, doesn't exist anymore. Kael was quiet for a long moment, considering. That's dangerous. You walk into Millbrook Hollow, you're on their territory. They could arrest you for anything they manufacture, hold you, force you into whatever arrangement the Draytons want. Not if I'm not alone. Elena met his eyes. Not if I have witnesses who aren't controlled by the Draytons. Not if I do it publicly, in a way that can't be covered up or spun into their narrative. You're talking about confrontation. I'm talking about ending this. Elena's voice was firm. My father needs to face me and acknowledge what he did. Caleb needs to understand that he doesn't own me, never did, never will. And I need to walk away from that town on my own feet, in front of everyone, so there's no question about whether I was taken or left willingly. Kael stood, moved to the window, looked out at the forest. If we do this, we do it carefully. We plan every moment, every contingency. We make sure you can't be trapped, can't be isolated, can't be forced into anything you don't choose. We? He turned and something in his expression had softened. You think I'd let you walk into that town alone? After everything? No. If you're doing this, I'm there. Not to fight for you. You can handle yourself now. But to make sure they know you're not alone. That touching you means dealing with someone who has nothing to lose and no investment in their rules. Elena felt warmth spread through her chest, gratitude and something deeper, something she'd been aware of growing between them but hadn't named. Partnership that was becoming something more. Respect that was becoming trust. Survival that was becoming choice. When? She asked. Give it 3 days. Let them settle. Let them think they've scared us into submission. Then we go down, we do what needs doing, and we come back here. He smiled slightly. Home. The word hung in the air between them. Home. Not just a place, but a concept, something they were building together in this isolated cabin surrounded by wilderness that had tested them both and found them worthy. Home, Elena agreed. They spent those 3 days preparing. Kael taught Elena how to present herself, not as the broken woman who'd fled in a wedding dress, but as someone who'd chosen transformation. How to stand, how to speak, how to project absolute certainty even when doubt tried to creep in. They'll try to shake you, he said during one session. They'll bring up your father's suffering, your responsibilities, your guilt. They'll try to make you feel small again, like you felt in that church. You need to hold on to who you are now, not who you were then. Elena practiced. She stood in front of Kael and recited her truth. What had happened, what she'd chosen, what she'd become. until the words were armored, unshakable. On the morning of the third day, they dressed carefully. Elena wore clothes that were practical but clean, the mountain gear that had become her uniform, the rifle slung across her back, not as a threat, but as a statement. Kael wore similar gear, and together they looked like what they were, people who belonged to the wilderness, who'd been shaped by it into something harder than the soft town below could understand. They hiked down in silence, taking the south road that had been cleared by the tactical team's retreat. The journey that had nearly killed Elena 5 weeks ago took just over 2 hours now, her body moving with efficiency that spoke to how much had changed. Millbrook Hollow appeared through the trees, looking smaller than Elena remembered. The houses seemed cramped, the streets narrow, the whole town compressed into a space that felt claustrophobic after the vast openness of the mountains. They walked straight down Main Street at noon when foot traffic was heaviest. People stopped, stared. The whispers started immediately, a wave of recognition and shock that followed them like a physical force. Elena kept her eyes forward, her stride steady. Beside her, Kael was a silent presence, radiating the kind of controlled danger that made people step back instinctively. They reached the town square where the weekly farmers market was in full swing. Elena stopped in the center, right where everyone could see her, and waited. She didn't have to wait long. "Elena!" Mrs. Henderson from the ladies' auxiliary pushed through the crowd, her face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, honey, we were so worried. When the sheriff's team came back saying that you'd been—" "I'm fine, Mrs. Henderson." Elena's voice carried across the square, clear and firm. "I'm more than fine. I'm exactly where I choose to be." More people were gathering now, drawn by the spectacle. Elena saw faces she'd known her entire life. Neighbors, former friends, people who'd watched her humiliation in the church and done nothing. She saw their curiosity, their judgment, their barely concealed excitement at having new drama to dissect. And then she saw her father. Lawrence Cross pushed through the crowd, looking smaller than Elena remembered, diminished by weeks of stress and shame. His eyes met hers, and she saw hope flicker in them. The desperate hope that maybe she'd come back, maybe she'd save him after all. "Elena." His voice broke on her name. "Please, you have to understand. The debt. The Draytons called it all in. I'm losing everything. The house goes to auction next week. The business is already gone. He stopped, swallowed hard. "I'm begging you, as your father, come home. Work something out with Caleb. Fix this." Elena looked at the man who'd raised her, who'd taught her to ride a bike and helped her with homework and read her stories before bed when she was small. The man who'd also gambled away their security, prioritized his addictions over his family, and tried to sell his daughter to pay his debts. "No," she said simply. "Elena, please." "No." Louder now so everyone could hear. "You don't get to ask that of me. You don't get to beg for my sacrifice when you were willing to watch me be destroyed to save yourself." "I didn't know what Caleb would do. Go see." "Yes, you did." Elena's voice was steel. "You knew exactly what kind of man he was. You just didn't care as long as he cleared your debt. And when he humiliated me, when he called me adequate and worthless in front of everyone, you didn't defend me. You didn't speak. You just stood there, calculating whether you could still salvage the deal." Lawrence's face crumpled. "I'm your father. Family is supposed to protect each other, support each other, put each other first." Elena gestured to Kael. "This man, who I've known for 5 weeks, has shown me more loyalty and care than you did in 24 years. So no, Father, I'm not coming back. I'm not fixing your mistakes. I'm not sacrificing my life for your comfort." The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. This was better than theater, better than television. This was real pain, real drama, happening right in front of them. "Then I'll lose everything," Lawrence said, his voice small. "Yes, you will. And maybe that's what it takes for you to finally take responsibility for your choices." Elena's voice softened slightly, not with weakness, but with finality. "I hope you survive this. I hope you find a way to rebuild. But it won't be at my expense. Not anymore." She turned away from her father and faced the crowd. "I know what you all think, that I'm being selfish, ungrateful, that I'm abandoning my duties. But here's what I've learned. Duty without choice is just slavery with a prettier name. and I choose freedom. Freedom! The voice came from the edge of the crowd, and people parted to let Caleb Drayton through. He was dressed perfectly, every hair in place, his expression carefully arranged into concern. You call living in the wilderness with a violent hermit freedom? I call making my own choices freedom. Yes. Elena met his eyes without flinching. And he's not violent. He's prepared. There's a difference. He triggered an avalanche that nearly killed a dozen law enforcement officers. He triggered an avalanche that stopped them from illegally seizing someone who didn't want to be seized. And everyone walked away safely because he calculated it carefully. Unlike you, who destroyed me in that church without a thought for the consequences. Caleb's mask slipped slightly, irritation showing through. I told you, I was angry. I made mistakes. But I'm willing to try again, to start over. Yeah, same. I'm not. Elena took a step toward him and had the satisfaction of seeing him step back. You don't get to hurt me and then decide when you're forgiven. You don't get to control my narrative, my reputation, my life. You exposed me to humiliation for your own purposes, and now you want me back because having me refuse you is worse for your image than anything else could be. That's not. It's exactly true. If I'd quietly disappeared, if I'd died in that storm, you could have been the tragic hero. But I survived. I chose something else. And that makes you look like exactly what you are. A small, cruel man who tried to break someone and failed. Caleb's face flushed red. You think you can just walk away? Reject everything? I have lawyers. I have influence. I can make your life impossible. In town maybe, but I don't live in town anymore. Elena smiled, and it felt dangerous, powerful. I live in a place where your money doesn't matter, your name doesn't matter, your threats don't matter. I live in a place where the only things that count are strength, skill, and will. And I have all three now. Sheriff Denton pushed through the crowd, his hand on his service weapon. Miss Cross, I think you should come with me. We need to have a conversation about what happened on that mountain. What happened is your tactical team tried to kidnap someone who was clearly not being held against her will, and the mountain defended itself. Elena didn't move. If you want to charge someone with something, charge the people who filed false reports and wasted public resources. The Draytons filed legitimate concerns. The Draytons filed manipulative lies to try and force me back into their control. Elena's voice rang out across the square. And you, Sheriff, followed their orders instead of doing your actual job. How much do the Draytons pay you? How many favors do you owe Edmund? Denton's hand tightened on his weapon. You need to watch your mouth. Or what? You'll arrest me for speaking truth? Do it. Right here, in front of everyone. Show them who you really serve. The standoff held for a long moment. Then Kyle spoke for the first time since they'd entered town, his voice low and absolutely certain. You draw that weapon, Sheriff, and I promise you'll regret it. Not because I'll hurt you, though I could, but because every single person here will have seen you threaten an unarmed woman for embarrassing your benefactors. That's not a story that ends well for you. Denton's hand moved away from his weapon. He knew when he was beaten, knew that the crowd's sentiment was shifting. Elena Cross wasn't the desperate woman in the wedding dress anymore. She was something else, something stronger, and people could see it. This isn't over. Edmund Drayton's voice came from behind Caleb, cold and measured. You may have won this moment, Elena, but the debt remains. Your father's failure remains. And consequences have a way of finding people, even in the wilderness. Elena turned to face the patriarch of the Drayton family, the man whose money had controlled so much of her life without her even realizing it. She saw him clearly now, not as some powerful figure to be feared, but as an old man clinging to control because it was all he had. Let them come, she said. Your consequences, your collectors, your lawyers, and your thugs. Let them all come up that mountain. They'll learn what I learned, that you can't control people who refuse to be controlled, that money is useless where survival is currency, that all your power is just an illusion that breaks the moment someone chooses to stop believing in it. She walked forward, not around Edmund, but directly toward him, and he stepped aside. The crowd parted as she and Kyle moved through it, heading back toward Main Street, toward the road that led out of town and up into the mountains. Behind her, Elena heard voices rising, arguments, discussions, the sound of a community trying to process what they'd just witnessed. She didn't look back. That world was behind her now, and she had no more business in it. They were almost to the edge of town when Elena heard running footsteps. She turned, hand moving instinctively toward her rifle, but it was Officer Reeves, the young tactical officer from the mountain. "Miss Cross, wait!" He stopped a few yards away, breathing hard. I wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened up there. The sheriff gave orders, but you were right. You clearly weren't being held. I should have pushed back harder." Elena studied him, this young man who'd been caught between duty and truth and had tried to navigate both. "You did push back. I heard you question the orders. That took courage." "Not enough." "Maybe not. But courage isn't an all-or-nothing thing. You did what you could in that moment. Next time, maybe you'll do more." Reeves nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you made it. Glad you found whatever it is you found up there." "I found myself," Elena said simply. "Turns out she was worth finding." She and Cale continued walking, leaving Millbrook Hollow behind. The mountain rose ahead of them, white peaks against blue sky, beautiful and brutal and home. They didn't speak during the hike back. There was nothing that needed saying. Elena had faced her past and survived it. She'd looked her father and Caleb and the whole town in the eyes and claimed her right to choose her own life. And they'd seen her do it, all of them. There would be no more questions about whether she'd been taken or left willingly. No more narratives about rescue or captivity. Just the simple truth that Elena Cross had walked away from everything they offered and chosen something harder but infinitely more real. The cabin appeared through the trees as the sun was setting, and Elena felt something settle in her chest. Relief, yes, but also certainty. This was home. Not because it was comfortable or safe or easy, but because she'd chosen it, because she'd fought for it, because she'd become the kind of person who could survive here. That night, they sat by the fire like they had so many nights before. But something was different. The tension that had defined their existence for weeks was gone. The threat had been faced, the confrontation completed, and what remained was just them and the choices they'd made. "What you did today," Kael said finally, "that took more courage than most people ever find." "I learned from the best," Elena replied. "I taught you survival. That other thing, standing up to your past, claiming your future, that was all you." Elena looked at him across the fire, this man who'd saved her life and then taught her how to save herself, who'd been hard because hardness was necessary, but never cruel, who'd given her space to become whoever she needed to become. "Thank you," she said. "For everything." Kael shook his head. "Don't thank me. You did the work. I just didn't stop you. Still, I wouldn't have made it without you." "Maybe, maybe not." He stood, moved to sit beside her instead of across from her, a shift in proximity that felt significant. "But I know I wouldn't want to be out here alone anymore. Turns out having a partner isn't as bad as I thought it would be." "Just not bad? Actually pretty good." He met her eyes, and Elena saw something in his expression she'd never seen before. Vulnerability. Hope. If you wanted to stay, permanently, build this life together instead of just surviving it. Elena felt her heart beating hard against her ribs. This was a different kind of choice than the ones she'd been making, not survival, but something beyond it. Not just refusing what she didn't want, but claiming what she did. "I want to stay," she said. "I want to build a life here with you. Not because I'm running from something, but because I'm running toward something, toward being myself, toward being free, toward—" She paused, finding the courage to name it. "Toward you." Kael's hand found hers, rough and calloused and absolutely certain. "Then stay. Build with me. Be dangerous and free in yourself." Elena leaned into him, felt his arm come around her shoulders, and watched the fire burn. Outside, the wind moved through the trees with its eternal song. Inside, there was warmth and safety and the quiet contentment of having found exactly where you belonged. The months that followed were not easy. Winter deepened, then broke. Spring came with its own challenges, melting snow revealing damage that needed repairing, animals emerging hungry and aggressive, weather patterns that shifted hour by hour. But Elena met every challenge with the strength she'd built, the skills she'd learned, the confidence that came from knowing she could survive anything because she'd already survived the worst. She and Kael fell into a rhythm that was partnership, friendship, and slowly, carefully, something more. Love built not from need, but from respect. From watching each other face the mountain's tests and succeed. From trusting each other with the kind of truth that only existed in places where pretense meant death. In the town below, Lawrence Cross lost his house and his business, just as he'd feared. Elena heard about it through the occasional ranger who passed through their territory, but she felt only distant sympathy. He'd made his choices. She'd made hers. They were both living with the consequences. Caleb Drayton tried once more to send people up the mountain, private investigators, not law enforcement, hired to prove that Elena was being held against her will. They came back with photos of Elena hunting, setting traps, moving through the wilderness with the confidence of someone who belonged there. The case collapsed, and eventually the Draytons moved on to other concerns, other ways to exercise their power. By the time summer arrived in full force, Elena had been on the mountain for 6 months. Her body was lean and powerful, her hands permanently calloused, her skin weathered by sun and wind. She could shoot accurately at 300 yards, bring down a deer cleanly, process the meat without waste, preserve enough food to last through the next winter. She could navigate by stars, start fires in rain, predict weather by reading clouds. She could defend herself, defend her home, defend the life she'd built. But more than all of that, she knew who she was. Not Lawrence Cross's daughter, not Caleb Drayton's rejected bride, not the adequate woman who wasn't enough. Just Elena. Strong, capable, free. One evening in late July, as they sat outside the cabin watching the sun set over peaks they'd climbed together, Kael spoke without looking at her. "Do you ever regret it, walking into that storm?" Elena thought about it honestly. "I regret the pain it caused, the relationship with my father that died, the version of myself that had to break before I could become this. But the choice itself? No, never. Even though you almost died? Especially because of that." Elena took his hand, laced their fingers together. "That night in the snow, I was choosing death over humiliation, over a life that wasn't mine, and what I found instead was actual life, real life, chosen life. How could I regret that?" Kael squeezed her hand. "I'm glad you didn't die in the snow." "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, brilliant against the darkening sky. The mountain night came alive with sounds: owls, distant coyotes, wind in the trees. Sounds that had once seemed threatening, but now were just home. "I love you," Kael said suddenly, in case that wasn't obvious. Elena smiled, leaned into his shoulder. "It was kind of obvious. I love you too." "Good, because you're stuck with me now. This mountain, this life, it's a package deal. Best deal I ever made." And it was true. Elena had lost everything that day at the altar: her future, her reputation, her place in the civilized world. But in losing it, she'd found something far more valuable. She'd found strength she didn't know she possessed. She'd found a home in the wilderness. She'd found a partner who saw her clearly and loved what he saw. Most importantly, she'd found herself. The woman who'd run from that church in a wedding dress was gone, transformed by cold and hardship and choice into someone unrecognizable. Someone harder, someone freer, someone who'd looked at the world's expectations and rejected them in favor of truth. Elena Cross had died in the snow that December night, but from that death, someone new had been born. Someone who belonged to no one but herself. Someone who'd learned that survival wasn't about comfort or safety or other people's approval. It was about knowing what you were made of and refusing to be less than that, no matter what it cost. She'd paid the price. She'd become dangerous. She'd claimed her freedom, and sitting on that mountain with Kael beside her and the stars overhead, and the rest of her life stretching out like the wilderness, vast and challenging and absolutely hers, Elena had never felt more alive. The mountain had tested her and found her worthy. The world had tried to define her and failed, and in the end, the only opinion that mattered was her own. She was Elena Cross. She was free. She was home. And that was everything.